The storm raged over the crumbling fortress as Jonathan Hale gripped the sword with trembling hands, his breath ragged in the torchlit chamber. The general's order echoed in his mind, "Execute the prisoner." His gaze fell on the chained figure, a boy barely older than his lost brother. Jonathan's chest tightened with guilt, memories of the village he abandoned clawing at his soul. Daniel whispered with venom, "Show them strength or show them cowardice." Jonathan's jaw clenched, torn between duty and humanity. Marcus smirked in the shadows, eager to claim dominance over a faltering soldier. As lightning cracked outside, Jonathan muttered, "If I strike him, I betray myself. If I refuse, I betray them all." The prisoner's wide eyes pleaded in silence. History demanded blood, but Jonathan's conscience demanded mercy. The chamber fell still, every heartbeat louder than the storm. The fortress courtyard echoed with distant drums as Jonathan stepped outside, his sword heavy with indecision. Rain soaked his cloak, masking the sweat of guilt that burned his skin. Villagers whispered behind shuttered windows, their faces pale with fear of soldiers who marched through their streets. Daniel followed closely, speaking softly. "The people see weakness and hesitation." Jonathan clenched his fists, his heart aching at the sight of starving children huddled under broken carts. Marcus's voice boomed from a balcony. "Our enemies thrive while you falter." Jonathan's breath caught as a child's cry pierced the storm. He remembered the day he abandoned his own village, flames consuming everything. Every step through the courtyard felt heavier, the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. Shadows stretched long across the rain-soaked ground, as if the past itself tried to drag him down. The next morning, the storm had calmed, leaving behind the stink of wet stone and ash. Jonathan stood on the fortress walls, staring out at fields where enemy banners flickered like distant fireflies. His mind churned with guilt, yet resolve flickered faintly within him. Daniel approached with a calm smile. "You hesitate because you fear the truth." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Below them, Marcus drilled soldiers with ruthless efficiency, shouting orders that rang across the field. Jonathan gripped the cold stone, whispering to himself, "If I run again, their blood is mine." Sarah stumbled onto the wall, carrying bread, her wide eyes catching sight of the distant banners. "Are they coming for us?" she asked softly. Jonathan's chest ached as he answered, "They're always coming." His voice carried both fear and defiance. That evening, the council chamber filled with flickering lanterns and the low murmur of voices. Marcus spoke loudly, demanding more executions to instill fear. "Strength demands sacrifice," he declared. Jonathan sat at the table's edge, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Daniel nodded in agreement, feeding Marcus's words with quiet approval. Sarah, cleaning nearby, froze as the words struck her heart. Jonathan finally raised his head, voice low but steady. "Fear will not hold these people. Only justice will." The chamber fell silent, eyes turning toward him with suspicion. Marcus laughed coldly. "Justice is a tale for peasants. Power keeps order." Jonathan's chest rose as he met his rival's gaze, defiance burning faintly in his weary eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of resolve, though the shadows of his failures still haunted every breath. Night cloaked the fortress in silence, broken only by the crackle of torches. Jonathan wandered alone along the ramparts, haunted by echoes of Marcus' laughter and Daniel's whispers. His hands traced the scar on his cheek, reminder of battles lost and choices abandoned. Below, the villagers huddled in fear, their whispers carried upward by the wind. Jonathan closed his eyes, hearing the cries of his past, flames and screams of the village he had forsaken. Suddenly, a shadow moved near the tower steps. A cloaked figure lingered, watching him with stillness too deliberate. Jonathan's heart raced, hand moving instinctively to his sword. "Who are you?" he demanded into the night. The shadow figure's voice answered low and steady, "One who remembers what you tried to forget." The words cut through the air like steel, promising revelation and danger yet to come. Morning mist hung heavy over the fortress courtyard as soldiers drilled under Marcus's sharp commands. Jonathan watched from the shadows, his fists tightening with every barked order. Daniel approached, his tone calm but biting. "Do you see how easily Marcus wins them? Strength wins loyalty." Jonathan's chest burned with shame, remembering when his own hesitation left men to die. Sarah hurried past with a basket, pausing to glance at him, eyes wide with unspoken fear. Her presence reminded him that not all followed Marcus, that some still searched for hope. Marcus raised his sword and shouted, "We march by dusk, and those who falter will be left behind." The men cheered, their voices drowning Jonathan's silence. He whispered to himself, "If I cannot lead, I condemn them all." Yet the memory of failure clung like chains, holding him in place. By midday, the village market outside the fortress lay in ruins, stalls abandoned, goods scattered. Jonathan walked among the wreckage, the stench of rot heavy in the air. He heard whispers from hiding villagers, their voices laced with fear of betrayal. A boy ran past, clutching bread, only to be struck down by a soldier loyal to Marcus. Jonathan froze, guilt tightening his throat. Daniel whispered behind him, "You cannot save them all." Jonathan growled softly, "But I must save someone." Sarah appeared from the shadows, rushing to shield the boy's body, her eyes filled with grief. The betrayer's gaze lingered, unreadable, as Jonathan stepped forward. The villagers watched from their shutters, waiting for someone to defy the soldiers. His heart pounded, knowing that silence made him complicit, but defiance meant open war. The council reconvened in the fortress hall, Marcus slamming his fist against the table. "We march tonight. No weakness, no mercy." Jonathan sat opposite, struggling to keep his composure. Sarah served quietly at the edges, her eyes darting toward him, silently pleading. Daniel's voice dripped with poison as he agreed with Marcus. "Only strength will keep us alive." Jonathan lifted his head, his voice trembling yet steady. "Strength without justice breeds only monsters." The chamber grew tense, guards shifting uneasily. Marcus sneered, "You are too weak to command even your conscience." Jonathan's chest tightened, his mind flashing to the prisoner's eyes from the night before. He felt Sarah's gaze pressing on him, urging him not to bend. His words echoed in the chamber like a challenge. Then let history judge whether weakness or cruelty endures. As twilight fell, Jonathan stood at the fortress gates, watching Marcus's soldiers prepare for departure. Horses stamped restlessly, armor gleamed, and drums echoed through the valley. Daniel slipped to his side, speaking softly, "Join him or be crushed by him." Jonathan's chest heaved, his eyes fixed on the people gathered behind the gates, silent and afraid. Sarah pushed through the crowd, her voice low but urgent. "If you leave them, who will remain?" Her words pierced the fog in his mind. Marcus barked orders, commanding lines to form. Jonathan's hand gripped his sword, fingers trembling. The betrayer's smile flickered as though savoring Jonathan's torment. Darkness spread across the sky, lanterns casting long shadows over the road. Jonathan whispered to himself, "This choice will mark me forever." His breath shook as the gates creaked open. Night consumed the valley as the army marched under Marcus's command, torches flickering like a river of fire. Jonathan remained at the fortress, staring into the distance where drums echoed. The silence behind him grew unbearable, broken only by Sarah's quiet step. "You cannot keep hiding," she whispered. Jonathan closed his eyes, the weight of his failures crushing his chest. Daniel emerged from the shadows, his voice sharp. "Your hesitation will kill more than any blade." Jonathan turned, voice low, "Perhaps mercy will save what strength destroys." The villagers gathered in silence, their faces thin, hollow, desperate. The shadow figure lingered at the ramparts, watching. Jonathan felt the pull of destiny, the burden pressing harder than ever. The night was alive with choices, each step forward dragging him closer to redemption or ruin. The valley stretched beneath the fortress walls, fields scarred by marching armies. Jonathan stood high above, his eyes fixed on smoke rising from villages in the distance. Marcus's soldiers camped below, their banners snapping in the cold wind. Daniel stepped beside him, his tone cutting. "The world chooses strength, not hesitation. Jonathan's chest ached, guilt bleeding into anger. Sarah approached quietly, carrying water for soldiers, her gaze settling on him with worry. "They look to you even if you cannot see it," she said softly. Jonathan turned, eyes narrowing. "They see a failure who abandoned them once before." Her voice trembled. "Then prove them wrong." The words struck deep, stirring something long buried. Jonathan gripped the stone wall, whispering, "If I cannot stand now, I will never rise again." The drums of war echoed louder, like the heartbeat of history itself. Inside the great hall, Marcus addressed his officers with commanding presence. His voice rang clear, "We strike the villages before dawn. Fear will break their will." The officers murmured in approval. Jonathan entered late, his boots echoing against the stone. Silence fell as his gaze locked with Marcus's. Jonathan's voice carried steady defiance. "Fear will not unite them. It will make them resist." Marcus laughed coldly. "You speak of mercy as if it wins wars." Jonathan clenched his jaw, memories of fire and screams sharpening his resolve. Daniel leaned against the wall, his eyes gleaming with hidden satisfaction, watching loyalties shift. Sarah lingered near the doorway, torn between fear and fragile hope. The hall's lanterns flickered as tension thickened, the air itself heavy with choices. Jonathan knew the path ahead would carve his fate in blood or redemption. Night cloaked the fortress as Jonathan walked alone through the deserted training yard. His footsteps echoed, his mind haunted by Marcus's words. The clashing of swords erupted suddenly, two young recruits sparring under torchlight. Their strikes were desperate, untrained, their faces marked by fear. Jonathan watched in silence, guilt pressing down as he saw reflections of himself in their hesitation. One recruit fell hard, the other froze, sword shaking. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice firm. "A blade without conviction is a burden." The recruit stared, wide-eyed at his presence. Jonathan picked up the fallen sword, its weight heavy in his hand. "Courage comes not from strength, but from purpose," he told them, his tone steady. In their eyes he glimpsed faint hope, though his own doubts still burned. Above, the moon cast cold silver light across the yard. By dawn, Jonathan stood at the edge of the camp as Marcus prepared his men. The drums beat like thunder, soldiers forming lines, banners snapping in the wind. Daniel walked among them, whispering encouragement laced with poison. Jonathan's chest tightened, every drumbeat reminding him of battles lost. Sarah moved through the crowd, passing bread and water, her glance meeting his with unspoken plea. Marcus mounted his horse, declaring, "We ride to conquer, not to beg for peace." The soldiers cheered, their voices shaking the air. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice raw. "Then you ride toward ruin, not victory." Silence rippled through the ranks, eyes turning to him. Marcus's glare burned like steel, but Jonathan did not falter. In that moment, the first seeds of defiance sprouted among the weary faces of the soldiers. That night, Jonathan sought refuge in the chapel ruins outside the fortress. Broken statues and shattered glass glimmered in pale moonlight. He knelt, whispering prayers he no longer believed, searching for strength. The door creaked, and Sarah entered quietly, her hands clasped, her face pale with exhaustion. "Why do you still fight when the world wants you broken?" she asked softly. Jonathan lifted his gaze, voice raw. "Because if I stop, then every death will mean nothing." Daniel's shadow lingered at the doorway, unseen by them, listening with sharp intent. Sarah placed her hand on Jonathan's shoulder, whispering, "Then let this fight redeem you." The silence deepened, only the rustle of wind through broken glass filling the chapel. Jonathan bowed his head, his resolve hardening in the sacred ruin. The path forward was bloody, but it was his to walk. The council met again under the weight of storm clouds pressing against the fortress roof. Marcus demanded total obedience, his voice sharp as steel. Jonathan stood silent until Sarah burst in, her face pale with fear. She carried a scroll she had found among abandoned records. "This seal is not ours," she whispered, trembling. Jonathan's heart pounded as he recognized the crest. It belonged to the enemy. Daniel's face flickered with unease as Marcus snatched the scroll, trying to conceal its content. Jonathan shouted, "You feed them our blood." Marcus glared, his mask cracking. The hall erupted in chaos, guards shifting, officers whispering in shock. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched Jonathan's arm, whispering, "We've been betrayed from within." For the first time, Marcus's ambitions and treachery stood naked before them all. The fortress courtyard filled with whispers as word of betrayal spread. Soldiers stared at Marcus with uncertainty, their loyalty cracking. Jonathan stepped before them, his voice carrying, "He trades your lives for his throne." Marcus thundered, "Lies from a coward who cannot strike." Daniel lingered near, his eyes darting like a snake, torn between sides. Sarah pressed forward, holding the scroll aloft for all to see, the seal glowing in the torchlight. Murmurs grew into shouts, doubts surging through the ranks. Jonathan's chest swelled as he shouted, "We are not pawns, we are people." The soldiers froze, torn between Marcus's command and Jonathan's rising defiance. For the first time, history shifted on uncertain ground, the line between loyalty and rebellion blurring like smoke in the storm. Later that night, Jonathan cornered Daniel in the torchlit corridor, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "You knew," Jonathan growled. Daniel's smirk faltered before returning like a mask. "Knowledge is survival," he replied coldly. Jonathan pressed closer, blade half drawn. "You betrayed us for their coin." Daniel's tone cracked with bitterness. "For my family's lives, held hostage while you played at honor." Jonathan froze, the revelation cutting deeper than steel. Betrayal was not greed but blackmail. Yet its weight crushed them all the same. Sarah appeared suddenly, her gasp filling the corridor. Daniel's eyes glistened with tears before hardening again. "You'll never understand what it costs to live with no choice," he hissed. The corridor seemed narrower than ever, the shadows pressing close as truths shattered loyalties. The shadow figure revealed himself at last, stepping from the chapel ruins where Jonathan sought answers. Cloaked in secrecy, his voice low, he said, "I have guarded your family all this time." Jonathan's breath caught, memories flooding of the fire that consumed his village. "You saved them," he whispered, trembling. The shadow figure nodded, though his face remained hidden. "I preserved what you thought lost, so you might rise again." Jonathan staggered, the truth striking harder than any blade. Sarah's eyes widened, whispering, "Then hope still lives." Daniel, lurking nearby, clenched his fists, the revelation shattering his certainty. The storm outside thundered like a herald of destiny. Jonathan's knees buckled, but resolve steadied him. For the first time, he saw a path that could redeem his failure, even if drenched in blood. The fortress square became the stage for final exposure. Jonathan stood before soldiers and villagers alike, his voice echoing against the stone. Marcus serves the enemy, Daniel was forced into betrayal, and the shadow kept hope alive. Murmurs rippled like fire through dry grass. Marcus drew his blade, roaring, "You'll not steal my command." The crowd's fear turned to defiance, voices rising in anger. Daniel stepped forward, his voice breaking, "He speaks truth." Sarah gripped Jonathan's hand tightly, whispering, "They believe in you." Jonathan raised his sword, not in attack but in vow. "We fight not for his crown, but for our lives, our homes, our redemption." The storm above split with lightning, illuminating faces no longer bound by fear. History's tide shifted, and Jonathan's redemption began to take form in their eyes. The fortress roared with chaos as Marcus's loyalists clashed with villagers and soldiers who had turned. Steel rang against steel, torches hurled into the night. Jonathan cut through the fray, his blade flashing. Sarah dragged the wounded aside, her cries drowned in the clash. Daniel darted between shadows, torn between aiding Jonathan and preserving himself. Marcus bellowed from atop the stairs, his command like thunder, "Strike them down!" Jonathan's voice rose, no more blood for his greed. The courtyard trembled beneath the weight of divided loyalties. Fear and fury fused, twisting into violent defiance. Flames climbed the wooden gates as arrows streaked across the night. Jonathan's chest burned with the truth. Redemption would only come through fire, sacrifice, and the choice to endure. Smoke filled the air as Jonathan led a charge through the collapsing courtyard. His sword clashed with Marcus's gods, sparks scattering across the cobblestones. Sarah screamed warnings as flaming beams fell from above. Daniel seized a guard's weapon, his face twisted in rage, striking with desperate fury. Jonathan's breath came heavy, his vision blurred with sweat and ash. Marcus descended into the fight, blade gleaming, eyes burning with wrath. "This fortress is mine," he roared. Jonathan's reply cut sharper than steel, "Not while I still breathe." The crowd of soldiers hesitated, caught between tyrant and savior. History's weight pressed down as the storm raged above and fire devoured below. The villagers fought with tools turned to weapons driven by survival, while Marcus's elite soldiers cut them down with brutal precision. Jonathan parried blow after blow, his arms numb from strain. Sarah carried water to the wounded, her dress torn, her hands trembling but steady. Daniel blocked an arrow meant for Jonathan, grunting in pain, his face twisted with conflicted loyalty. Jonathan turned, seeing Marcus carve through men with terrifying strength. "You think mercy will save them?" Marcus shouted. Jonathan's chest heaved, his blade lifted in defiance. "Mercy makes us worth saving," he answered, voice steady. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the blood-soaked courtyard. The battle surged, each clash echoing through history's halls. The battle pushed into the fortress hall, its banners torn and floors slick with blood. Jonathan faced Marcus at the center, swords colliding with thunderous force. Sparks showered across the chamber. Sarah screamed from the doorway, "End this!" Daniel staggered inside, blood dripping from his wound, his eyes wild. He cried, "You cannot fight him alone." Jonathan's jaw clenched, muscles burning. "Then stand with me." Marcus roared, "You are nothing but a deserter clinging to scraps of honor." Jonathan struck back, steel biting steel, fury surging. The hall shook as lightning flashed through shattered windows. The final confrontation had begun, and no corner of the fortress would escape its fire. The clash reached its fever pitch as Jonathan and Marcus battled with relentless strikes, blades ringing like bells of fate. Daniel lunged, deflecting a fatal blow meant for Jonathan, his cry echoing through the hall. Marcus sneered, "Even your allies fall for nothing." Jonathan's chest blazed with rage and sorrow. With a desperate cry, he disarmed Marcus, sword spinning across the stone. Jonathan pressed his blade to his enemy's throat, but hesitated, torn between vengeance and justice. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady, "Do not stain victory with his blood." Jonathan's breath trembled as he lowered the sword. "Let history judge him," he declared. The hall fell silent except for the storm outside, as the tyrant's reign crumbled under the weight of defiance. The hall was silent, except for the storm outside, rain dripping through broken beams. Jonathan stood over Marcus, sword lowered, chest heaving. Soldiers and villagers watched, their breath held. Marcus sneered even in defeat, his voice sharp, "Mercy makes you weak." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he did not strike. Daniel, bloodied, leaned against a pillar whispering, "If you falter now, it all returns." Sarah stepped closer, her voice firm, "End this cycle not with vengeance, but with justice." Jonathan closed his eyes, trembling, his scar burning like a brand of failure and hope alike. Lightning split the roof, illuminating his silhouette. In that moment, Jonathan bore the weight of history, poised between ruin and redemption. Jonathan ordered Marcus bound, his voice steady, though his hands shook. Soldiers obeyed hesitantly, their loyalty shifting with every glance. Marcus spat, "They will forget your mercy when the next tyrant comes." Jonathan replied coldly, "Let history remember I chose differently." Daniel coughed blood, collapsing, his voice fading. "Perhaps this redeems me." Sarah rushed to his side, gripping his hand, whispering, you still have a choice." Jonathan knelt beside them, torn by grief and duty. Outside, the storm thundered, as though the heavens judged their fate. The fortress no longer felt like stone and mortar, but like a crucible where souls were tested. At dawn, Jonathan stood before the villagers gathered in the courtyard. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with smoke and silence. His voice echoed against the stone. "We are free not because of bloodshed, but because we chose to rise." The people listened, their faces lined with grief, yet softened with fragile hope. Sarah stood near him, her hand steady on his arm. Daniel, pale and weakened, was carried on a stretcher, his eyes closed but his lips whispering apologies. Marcus glared from his chains, unrepentant, yet diminished. The villagers raised torches, their flickering flames symbols of unity. Jonathan lifted his sword, not in threat, but as a vow to rebuild. The light broke over the horizon, painting the ruins in gold. Later, Jonathan walked alone through the burned village outside the fortress. Ash clung to his boots, ruins whispering reminders of his past cowardice. Children searched for their families, women wept over shattered homes. He bent down to help lift a broken beam, his strength no longer for war but for rebuilding. Sarah approached, her eyes soft, saying, "They see you now, not as the man who left, but the one who returned." Jonathan looked at her, his voice low. "Redemption is not victory, it is the work that begins after." Daniel's stretcher was carried nearby, his faint voice saying, "At least, we stood." Jonathan's heart clenched, his gaze turning to the horizon where the sun burned away the last shadows of night. That evening, Jonathan stood at the ramparts once more, the horizon bathed in twilight. His scar caught the fading light, a mark of past failure and present endurance. Sarah joined him, her voice gentle. "What will you do now?" He answered quietly, "Whatever it takes to rebuild what I once abandoned." Daniel's faint laughter carried from the courtyard, mixed with pain but also relief. Below, villagers worked to mend walls and roofs, their voices carrying life into broken stone. Jonathan gazed at the sky, whispering, "History remembers victors, but I will be remembered as one who returned." The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying the scent of smoke and hope. The fortress no longer felt like a prison, but like a promise reborn. The village streets slowly filled with life again, as fires were quenched and wounds tended. Jonathan walked among the people, helping lift beams, offering quiet words. The children followed him, wide-eyed, whispering as though he were more legend than man. Sarah moved beside him, handing bread to hungry families, her voice carrying gentle reassurance. Daniel, bandaged, limped forward, his face pale but his steps stubborn. Villagers murmured thanks, their voices trembling with relief. Jonathan's chest ached with humility, whispering, "I do not deserve their trust." Sarah looked at him with steady eyes. "You earn it now, with every step." The day's light broke through the smoke, casting gold on the ruins that now held the seeds of renewal. In the courtyard, Marcus was dragged before the people, his chains clattering. His once commanding voice spat venom. "You will regret sparing me." Jonathan stood tall, his voice calm. "Your reign ends not with blood, but with truth." The villagers shouted in anger, some demanding vengeance, others begging for mercy. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying above them, "We are no longer his prisoners. We are our own." The crowd hushed, their anger shifting into silence. Daniel muttered bitterly, "He deserves the blade." But Jonathan's gaze held firm. "Let history judge him," he said again, voice steady. In that moment, justice was not vengeance, but restraint, and the people saw a different kind of strength rise among them. That night, the villagers gathered in the square, torches casting a warm glow. Songs rose, shaky but heartfelt, filling the air where screams once lingered. Jonathan stood at the edge, watching as families embraced. Sarah approached, smiling faintly. "They sing because they believe again." Jonathan replied softly, "Belief is harder to win than battle." Daniel sat nearby, wrapped in blankets, his eyes distant yet softened, whispering, "At least we lived to hear it." Jonathan's chest loosened for the first time in years, though sorrow still lingered. The flames flickered in rhythm with the voices, casting hope into the ruins. For the first time, the night did not echo with fear, but with the promise of tomorrow. Jonathan returned to the ruined chapel, its shattered windows glowing faintly with candlelight. He knelt where he once begged for forgiveness, his voice steady now. "I cannot change the past, but I can honor it." Sarah entered quietly, setting a candle beside him, her face illuminated with warmth. "Redemption is not found in prayers," she whispered, "but in how we carry the burden forward." Jonathan's eyes closed as he bowed his head, the weight of guilt finally softening into resolve. Daniel's shadow lingered outside the doorway, his face marked by both shame and fragile peace. Lightning no longer cracked above. The sky was calm, as though history itself allowed rest. At dawn, Jonathan walked alone along the ramparts, the horizon painted with fire and gold. His cloak whipped in the wind, his face worn but unyielding. Below, villages began rebuilding, hammers ringing with life. Sarah watched from the courtyard, her smile faint but proud. Daniel rested nearby, his wounds healing slowly, his gaze softer than before. Jonathan whispered into the wind, "History remembers victors, but I will be remembered as the one who returned." He turned, stepping into the light of a new day, leaving behind the man who once abandoned his people. The fortress no longer bore the weight of shame, but stood as the monument of his redemption.